from Yamaha. You guys know the drill, so let's get into it.
Thank you. All right. How's everybody doing today? Good. Home stretch right now, almost there, almost ready to go. My name is Jose Perez. I'm the Technical Marketing Manager for Yamaha. I've been with the company for about 10 years now. With me today, I have Andres Franco, and he'll be probably helping me during the presentation, or if you have any question at the end of the presentation, feel free to talk to him or to talk to me. My presentations, I like them to be very interacting with the audience. Feel free to ask any question at any time. Make sure that you don't feel that, oh, that's too basic, I shouldn't ask that in here, because then people are going to know that I don't know that and I should. Don't feel like that. You know, let's check the egos out at the door. We're just sound guys talking about sound equipment, which is great. Maybe that basic question that you have is the same question that somebody else has. So don't worry about it. Feel free to ask at any time. If I tell you I will get there, it's not that I'm trying to avoid your question by any means. It's just that I have time to answer that question. If I get to that subject and you feel that for some reason I don't answer your question, feel free to stop me there. I will be more than happy to build an example on the console and we can discuss it. Once the presentation is over, if you prefer to talk one-on-one, feel free to come down, talk to me, talk to Andres, and we'll take it from there. There's two presentations that I'm going to be doing. One of them it's CL, the other one is QL. They're both very similar consoles, so I am going to be, I'm going to start with the CL, and that's going to be the longer presentation because when I go to the QL, most of the things are going to be covered already because it's based on the CL. So you will see that it's going to be longer on the CL versus the QL. Once I go into the QL, I'm going to start comparing the two of them, what you should go one route or what is the application for one more than the other one. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Dante during my presentation because the communication that happens between the console and the stage boxes happens via Dante. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Dante as well. So once again, feel free to ask. Here we go. So as I mentioned, I'm going to start talking about the CL first. And one of the main things that I want to talk about is basically what you have or the different things that are the basic parameters of the CL line or the QL line. So when you look at it, on the CL line, you have 64 Dante channels that you can pick from the Dante network. Once again, I will talk about Dante, so don't worry about it if right now it doesn't make a lot of sense. But you have 64 IOs via the Dante module. The back of the console has 8 Omni inputs, 8 Omni outputs. Why do we call them Omni inputs, Omni outputs? Because these are just connectors. Coming from the analog world, when you look at the back of the console, you always have a specific input channel that has a number. This is my input 1. It's always going to be fader number 1. When I'm looking at the outputs, I have an aux number 1 output that you have a connector on the back that says aux number 1. Here, when you start dealing with the digital domain, you don't have that way of attaching things. The flexibility is endless. So basically here, I have input ports and output ports, and I can choose to take any one of those inputs and route it to any one of the faders. Same thing with the outputs. I have the output ports, and I can choose any output signal to go to any of them. That's why we call them Omnis. The other thing is we have 3 card slots on the back. Yamaha likes to speak every audio language. So basically, using the MY cards on the back of the console, we have the option of interfacing to different audio formats. A lot of times, something that people will come and say is, okay, so why do you only have 8 inputs on the back of the console? Or other products, you only have 16, but then you have, I don't know, 16, 24, 32 outputs, but you're only giving me a minimum amount of analog outputs on the back of the console. That is because we don't want to tell you, you have to use an analog output. We give you enough outputs to get you going, but you, as the engineer, choose which kind of format you want to be interfacing depending on the other pieces of the puzzle. You might have something that needs an AES output. You might have something else that is a network. Utilizing the MY cards, we can pick and choose what kind of format is the one that you want to be interfacing between the console and the other products that you're using. The CL has 24 mixes. Mixes are outputs of the console. They could act as auxes or they could act as groups. We also have 8 matrix outputs. On the CL, as well as on the QL, we support the input channel sent directly to the matrix. That means that if I'm using a CL console, I have my 24 mixes that I could be using as auxes. I also have my 8 matrix, so I could do up to 32 monitor mixes, discrete monitor mixes. We have a left and right and a mono output, or we can switch that to LCR mode. And LCR stands for left, center, and right. 16 DCAs, 8 mute groups or dimmer groups. I will come back to the dimmer portion of it because that's something else that is new with the CL line. There is a rack with premium effects in there or premium devices. Yamaha utilizes a technology called the virtual circuitry modeling, VCM. That is a technology that takes devices from the analog world and duplicates the way that they sound and react into DSP. So basically, we have a group of guys in Japan, and they take these analog devices that people like to use, and they measure every single resistor, capacitor, and absolutely everything that is on that signal, and measures exactly what that capacitor and that resistor is doing at every single step of the change. Now, that is a very, very accurate technology. As a matter of fact, we have some of the Rupert Neve Portico devices on that premium rack, and Rupert says that that is the only digital technology that can duplicate his analog sound into DSP, into the digital domain. There's 8 effects in there. There's also a total of 16 graphic EQs. There is 8 user-defined knobs, 16 user-defined keys, very small footprint. We have the option of controlling it with a computer, with an iPad, and we're going to see all those things through the presentation between the CL and the QL. So that is the overview of basically of the features of the CL line. Now, you probably saw in the first picture that I had 3 different pictures for CL because there's 3 different options. You have the CL5, the CL3, and the CL1. So what is the difference between the 3 of them? The difference is going to be the amount of faders that you have in front of you. It's also going to be the amount of input channels that you can mix at the same time. So if I'm looking at the CL1, which is the smallest of the 3 of them, I can mix up to 48 mono input channels. On the CL3, I can mix up to 64 mono input channels. And on the CL5, I can mix up to 72 input channels. When you look at those channels, for example, the 48, the 64 on the CL3, and out of the 72, 64 channels on the CL5 are coming from the Dante network. Okay? The other 8, to create the 72, remember the 8 omni inputs on the back of the console. So that's how we get up to 72 mono channels on the CL5. 64 from Dante plus 8 from the omni inputs on the back. Now, you'll see during my presentation that that is not the limitation of the amount of input channels that you can have there. I can have a lot more than those 72 input channels patched into the system. But at a time, that is the maximum amount that I can choose. That is without counting the 8 stereo input channels that by default are getting the signal from the internal effects. So that is the difference between the 3 of them. When you look at the back panel, and I always like to start with the hardware of the console because for some reason, we always dig into the console. We walk somewhere, the console is on, and we just move faders and we get something going. But there is a hardware that gets involved, and if we don't know exactly what the hardware is about, sometimes makes it a little bit difficult for us to understand how we can utilize the system. So I normally like to start with the hardware. I'm going to talk here about the back panel of the console. You see I have the 3 of them. I have the CL5, the CL3, the CL1. As a matter of fact, they're pretty much the same. The only difference between the three of them, I should say, it's actually that the CL5 and the CL3 have two connectors for lights. The CL1 has one. That is the big difference on the back, except the size. Other than that, it's all the same. So when you look at the back panel, you have the on and off switch, you have the IEC cord connector, you have the external power supply. The CL line has the option of having an external power supply as a backup. The way that that works is as follows. I could be running the console on the internal. I can have an external power supply plugged in, and they are both running at the same time. The console is taking 50% of the power from the internal, 50% from the external. If one of the power supplies has a problem, the console will shift 100% to the power supply that it's working correctly. At that moment, the only person that knows that there is a problem with a power supply, it's the person mixing on the console, the person looking at the screen, because the console will give you a message saying, hey, there is a power supply problem. The console will also be very specific, and it will tell you if the problem is with the internal or with the external power supply. Okay, so there's no glitches, no pops, no mutes, no nothing. The console does the transfer by itself. Then you have the 3 card slots, as I explained, different formats. Depending on the format that you're using, is the amount of channels that you can expand the console with. Normally, analog consoles will give you 4 channels or 8 channels. To go up to 16 channels of I/O through any one of those card slots, it will have to be a digital card or a network card. Besides that, we have kind of like the Cat5 connectors that we're familiar now with networks. The first one here, this is our network port, and the network port is the port that we're gonna use to connect our computer or our stage mix via the iPad. Now, the console doesn't have an internal wireless router. We will have to use an external wireless router. The computer or the iPad will connect to that wireless network, and that's how we can control the console wirelessly. If I don't want to be wireless with my computer, I just run a network cable between the console and my computer, and that's how they will communicate. Next to it, 2 more ports. Dante, that's the network that we're using to communicate between the control surface and the remote I/O. As I mentioned, I will talk a little bit more about Dante, but you have a primary and a secondary port in there. Here you have your Omni inputs and outputs. The Omni inputs are gonna be mic or line level. The Omni outputs are always gonna be line level. Besides that, there is a digital output, 2-track, AES EBU format, GPI connector, GPI, general purpose interface. Anybody here familiar with GPI? Anybody using GPI? No? GPI, it's basically a format that sends a command out of the console. So for example, I've been in places installing CLs or DM2000s or DM1000s, consoles that have a GPI, and basically with that GPI, I can trigger something outside of the console. A while back, I was in Vegas at a TV station out there, and we were using GPI for the engineer to be able to press a user-defined key on the console and turn a light outside of the control room that says on air. That's one of the options that I can do with a GPI. Believe it or not, years ago with a different product, I was at a church that they were using the GPI, the sound guy was using the GPI to trigger the coffee maker. So, and I'm not joking, basically on his way to the church, he will call the A2 and he will say, can you go to the console and press user-defined key number, so on and so forth. That was turning the coffee machine on. That way, by the time he got to the church, coffee was ready for him. Hey, you know what? It's available. You choose how you want to use it. That's the way technology can work for you. You have word clock in and out. The console has an internal word clock. Word clock is key when you're using digital devices. Why? Because that's what puts everything into one place. When you're using multiple digital devices, only one of them is going to be the master. The rest of them needs to be slave. If I'm taking multiple digital devices, but I'm patching them analog, I don't have to worry about work clock. But if I'm patching them digitally, work clock, it's going to be the one thing that I need to make sure that I have correct around my entire connection. Why? It's like having two directors in the same show. They're going to be fighting to each other. So basically what we're doing in here is saying, no, this is the reference. Everybody else is going to follow. So one master, everybody else, it's going to be slave. Everybody else is going to follow. Now, if you have more than one master, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be probably getting some glitches on the audio. Depending on the devices that you're patching together, you might not even get sound through it. But once again, keep in mind, if you're patching digital devices together, one master, multiple slaves. Then you have MIDI in and out. MIDI will interface with multiple external devices as well. If an external device speaks the MIDI language, I can trigger certain changes via MIDI from the console to the devices. I can also use that MIDI, for example, if I need to combine multiple consoles, what we call cascade, I can utilize MIDI to make sure that the consoles change at the same time. It could be a scene recall. It could be storing a scene. MIDI, as I said, it could be used to control something. It could be actually used to control another control surface. I was at a theater that the real location of the console was inside of a balcony. Anybody been there in that situation? They always choose, for some reason, the best available spot for the sound guy. Who cares? We don't want to see you guys. We'll put you in that corner. Now, they do that a lot of times because they want to sell tickets. They do it a lot of times because they don't want people to see the wires. But what happens? You have no clue of what that room sounds like, right? So we were at this theater where they were able to get two consoles, two control surfaces. So what we did was, via MIDI, we had the option that if they had the room to put the control surface downstairs via MIDI, what that person was doing was making changes on that control surface, on that CL5, on the theater floor, but he was actually not controlling any audio on that console. Literally, what that console was doing was moving the same thing on the console in the booth that has the audio plugged in. So basically, he will grab fader 1 and he will move it on the console down here. That will move fader 1 on in the control room upstairs. Changes on the EQ, changes on the aux sends. That's an example of what MIDI can do for you. Now, let's look at the control surface. Once again, 3 versions, CL1, CL3, and CL5. When you look at the CL1 on the fader count, you have 2 8-channel banks, and then you have 2 more faders. So 16 plus 2. If we go to the CL3 has 3 8-fader banks plus the 2 faders. The CL5 is the largest one of the control surfaces, the mixing consoles. So we have a total of 4 8-fader banks plus the 2 of them. So at that moment, I have 32 faders plus 2. I keep saying 8, 16 plus 2, 24 plus 2, and I'm not saying left and right, for example. Why? Because any one of those faders on any one of those consoles could do anything. It depends on what we choose to do with every single one of those faders. I'm going to go through the different layers here on the CL5 because that's the one with most of the faders, but basically we'll apply the same way for the other 2, for the CL1 and the CL3. So when you look at the fader bank, you have the 8 faders. You have the bank select keys. And basically what that is doing is the following. When you look at them, they say channels 1 through 16, 17 through 32, 33 to 48. Every single time I push one of those buttons, those are the input channels that I'm going to be controlling with those faders. So if I choose channel 1 through 16, Remember, it's 2 banks, so I will have my input channels 1 through 16. If I choose 17 through 32, it will be 17 through 32, so on and so forth. Those layers there, those are fixed. They're always going to be the same thing. But I mentioned already that any one of those faders can do anything you want. There is something that here, down here that says custom A1, A2, custom A3. Those layers there are the ones that you, as the user of the console, the sound guy, you will pick and choose what each one of those faders is going to do. And that's something that we can program on the console. Besides that, you have the fader. The fader is a 100 millimeter motorized fader. We have the display where we have the name. We have a color bar in there. We have the on switch to turn the channel off, turn it back on. We have an input meter that will tell us our input signal. We have a Q button right above that meter. Q is the button that you press when you want the signal to go to your headphones. Some people call it the PFL, some people call it the Q, some people call it the solo. Yamaha calls it the Q, so that's what that button is doing in there. Above that, there is a button that is called the SEL. That's the select button. All our consoles work the same way. 3 steps: select, adjust, and store. Once you remember those 3 steps, you're in business. You will see exactly why I say that, but remember that. If you say, I'm just going to remember one thing from this guy's presentation today, that's all I want you to remember, if that's what you're choosing to do. Select, adjust, and store. As a matter of fact, any digital console out there works the same way, following those 3 steps. Right above that, you have a channel encoder. That channel encoder will do different things depending on what you're choosing to do with them. So you have a button here, and when you push that button, the first option that you have is the gain. Gain, mic pre, trim is the same thing. Yamaha calls it the gain. Some other manufacturers will call it the mic pre. Some other people call it the trim. It's all the same. That is the place where we take that signal coming into the console and we put it at a level that we can work with. If you press that button one more time, then you're using that encoder to change the pan, left and right, center, however you want to do it. And one more option will be the assign. The assign is something that we can pick and choose. That assign could be to send signal from that input channel to a specific mix. It could be to the mix that you're selecting. Different things that we can do, and there is a menu that we can pick from. Then from there, I'm going to go, if you can put the console back, thank you, the PowerPoint. So from there, I'm going to go to the middle portion. On the middle portion, you have 8 more faders. They are very similar. Everything, as you can see, it's going to be the same as the other banks. You have the 8 faders, the 100 millimeter motorized faders, the ID, the on, the meter, Q, select. It's all the same, basically, when you navigate. The different things that you're going to find in there are going to be, for example, the SIM memory keys. Remember the select, adjust, and store? That's the store part. Why? When you're using a digital console, the digital console has the option of you putting information somewhere, saving it somewhere. Once I save it somewhere, which is in those scenes, I can go and pick it up again. I can bring it back. One of the main things that happen when people are using digital consoles is that they forget that little step of saving something. It's like you taking a picture. As a matter of fact, that's how we used to do it on the analog consoles. I remember doing analog monitor mixes where we will go from place to place, not carrying our own console, taking pictures of every single bank, and then we will go to the next place, and I will put the pictures on top of the different banks, trying to duplicate things. Now, what the console is doing that for me. So, I select a channel, I make adjustments, I hear those adjustments. If I want the console to remember when I go somewhere else, I will put them on that scene. Now, the console doesn't do anything for you. the console will follow your instructions. The console is not going to say, ooh, this guy's been working here for about 4 hours, so maybe it's a good time for me to save now. No, the console will not do that for you. You have to tell the console when you want the console to save something. That's why they select, adjust, and store. I was dealing with a guy during one of our seminars, and the guy was pretty upset because the guy worked for 6 hours doing a sound check. To tell you the truth, that 6-hour sound check, that sounds like a rehearsal for me. But anyway, 6 hours. During those 6 hours, he didn't have enough time to store a scene. It just takes a few seconds to do that, so there is no excuse. What happens? The guy went to the bathroom after the 6-hour sound check. While he was in the bathroom, somebody decided to recall a default scene on the console, and his 6 hours of work, you know what happened to them? They were gone. See you. So he was upset at the console. You cannot be upset at the console. You made the decision of not of not storing a scene, because if you store the scene, you can recall. Now, he didn't know the console well enough to realize that right above that recall button there, you see something that says undo key? There's something that says undo. The undo, which is above that recall button, is to bring you back to where you were before somebody recalled that new scene, or you recalled a new scene. So I could be here, and I have my 6 hours of work. Somebody went and recalled something completely different, and I didn't save my 6 hours of work. You know what I can do? I can do a recall undo, and the console will put me exactly where I was right before that new scene was recalled. It's only one step. So basically, if I'm here, I come here. And if I do an undo again, I come back here. It's not like the undo on your word processor or your Excel that you go undo, 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 undo. No, one step. You had a question, sir? Yes, go ahead. Okay, very good. Yes? Question is, what happens if when I recall that scene, head amps were changed and other things? Okay, so if I do that, when I do the undo, I will come back to where I was. So let's say my gain was at -6. I recall a scene. Now I'm at -12 or +12, whatever you want to do. If I do an undo, the undo, it's going to bring that head amp level to what it was before the new scene was recalled. So it is going to change because, once again, it's taking you completely back to where you were before that scene was recalled. Yes, go ahead. The undo only applies to the scene recall. There is a store undo, and I have a reason for that, because a lot of times people say, why don't you have an undo for everything? You know, I move something or I change an EQ. What happens if I don't like it? Can I undo it? We don't do that just for your own good, as a matter of fact. Because, for example, let's say I take a fader, and let's say I'm at -infinity, and I take that fader and I put it into unity. Ooh, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to undo that because I want the fader to go back to -infinity. You need to remember something. From -infinity to unity, there are multiple steps. So, for example, if I'm now at unity and I do an undo, in theory, the undo for that fader will be -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, so on and so forth, all the way to -infinity. That's why we don't have an undo for those parameters. The undo are for the recall and for the store only. And the store undo will be done through the screen. Those undos could also be done via user-defined key. All right? Then you have a monitor level. You have the bank select keys right here. As you can see, here you have the input, the output, and when you're on input, you have this area right here for your inputs. If you go to your outputs, you have the outputs right here. That monitor level, of course, if you're using, for example, headphones, if you're using the monitor output of the console, that knob needs to be up. And I'm calling it knob because that is actually an analog knob. The rest of the console, actually the total amount of analog knobs on the console is 3. Everything else is an encoder because it's changing digital information. Then the last one all the way to the right side of the CL5 console, which is actually the one that we have here on display, very similar. Once again, it's all the same thing. What changes there is that you have the extra faders that I've been talking about, this fader plus 2, this fader plus 2. By default, those 2 faders are going to be your stereo left and right, your mono output. Once again, those are wild faders, and they can do absolutely anything. They could become your money channel. About 2 years ago, we were doing the Yamaha 125th anniversary concert, and I was sitting at the monitor consoles, and one of those faders became the MC. It didn't matter where we went around. It didn't matter what layer we were or what scene we were recalling. It didn't matter. We always had the MC on that fader. That way we could have a quick access to it. That is what that money channel will be. Yes, sir?
How does it come default? What's the default setting?
The default for those 2 faders, the A fader is going to be your stereo left and right, and the B fader is going to be your mono. So by default, it's the stereo left and right plus the mono. Then when you look at the console itself, right there, kind of like in the middle of it, you have the central logic. Central logic was a technology that we introduced to the market where you can view and control absolutely everything from one area of the console. So you kind of like don't really have to move around unless you want to do so. What we do in there is we use the navigation keys, as I mentioned already, input or output. We choose what we want to view on the screen and what we want to control with those central logic faders. Once we do that, and I'm going to go back one slide, once we do that, what happens is whatever we choose to control with our central logic becomes a mirror of that layer. So for example, if I go to my central logic and I say input channels, and I choose, let's say, 1 through 8, when I go to my central logic faders and I change anything on one of those 8 faders, faders 1 through 8, input channels 1 through 8 are going to follow the same changes. But not only the fader. Remember, you have the window with the name, you have the input meter, you have the Q, you have the select, you have the on. All of those parameters are part of that fader. So when you're choosing to control something with the central logic faders, you're controlling everything that is assigned to that input or to that output channel. Within the central logic area, you have the selected channel area, you have the user-defined knobs that are on the console. So when you look, I mentioned already that the CL has a total of 24 mixes and 8 matrix. When we look at the selected channel here, you have 16 encoders. Those 16 encoders are going to be the ones that I'm going to use to control my sense to the 16 mixes, but it's 24 mixes. And I only have 16 encoders. That is correct. That is 1 through 16. I have a button up here that if I press it, then I have those 16 encoders that now are going to be used to send signal to mixes 17 through 24 and matrix 1 through 8. Because remember, the input channel can go directly to the matrix. So that's how I'm going to use those 16 encoders to be able to send signal to the 24 mixes plus the 8 matrix. We also have the 4 user-defined knobs, and with those user-defined knobs, we can do multiple things. Once again, there is a menu on the console where I can pick and choose what each one of those knobs is going to be doing. So, remember the 3 steps? Select, adjust, and store. Here's where we do the adjustment. Anybody here using an analog console and not familiar with a digital console at all? It's fine, don't worry, that's okay. If you're familiar with an analog console and you're coming to a digital console, there is going to be a process of getting used to that change. Why? Because on the analog console, everything is in front of you. It's a very visual device. On a digital console, now you have a minimum amount of buttons. You have a screen that has a lot of information. And a lot of times, to tell you the truth, you might feel that it doesn't make sense. Now, when you look at a digital console, thinking about the analog world, it will make a lot more sense. Why? When you look at your analog console and you have 48 input channels, each one of those channels is the same. You have a gain, you have an EQ, you have the send to the auxes. That is on channel 1, on channel 2, on channel 3, 4, 5, all the way. It doesn't matter how many input channels you have. Here, when I look at a digital console, I don't have those. I only have one. So what do? I select the channel, and I go to the selected channel area. So on my analog console, if I need to change my EQ on channel 1, I find my channel 1, I find where the EQ is, and I change it. If I need to change the EQ on channel 24, I find channel 24, find the EQ, and change it. Here on the digital console, what I'm doing is I'm selecting the channel, and I'm going to go to the selected channel area where I'm going to find the same parameters that I have on the analog console. Why? I have the gain, I have the EQ, I have the send to the auxes. They're always going to be in the same place. It doesn't matter if it's channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't matter. Those controls are always going to be in the same place. Now, there's a couple of other things that you have on the control surface. We have the touch screen, of course. You want to open a menu, you want to find a menu, you touch on it. That's how we open the different menus on the console. Under the armrest, you find the other two knobs. I said that there is a total of 3. One of them is the monitor knob on top of the console. The other 2 are under the armrest. One of them is next to a microphone input. That's for your talkback. And next to it, there is a knob to control the talkback input level. The other one is next to a headphone jack, and that's going to be for your headphone level. Besides that, there is a USB port. That USB port is going to be used for different things. For example, that USB port is going to be used to do console firmware updates. It's going to be used to do, for example, a recording, a 2-track recording, or 2-track playback. That USB is going to be used to take data in and out of the console. I'm mixing this show on a CL or on a QL, whatever it is, and I'm going to go to another city, and I'm going to have a different console, but I like what I have here. I take my USB, I take that information, I go to the next city, I go to the other side of the world, and I have another console. I load my data, and all that information that I have right here, right now, I can have tomorrow, wherever I go, that I have the console. Those are the uses for that. Any question? Yes? That is correct. The CL and the QL, the files are transferable from one to the next. I can work on a CL, I can save it, I can load it to a QL. I could work on a QL, I can save it, I can load it to a CL. No problem. If, for example, you have a file on an M7 CL, you have a file on an LS9, on a PM5D, we do have a free file conversion program, which is a download from our website. In that file conversion program, we'll take the data from one format to the next. Okay, so I mentioned already that the console has only 8 inputs and 8 outputs, and that we use something called Dante to communicate the network. Now, so the console has 8 inputs, 8 outputs. We're counting on a lot of external I/O, for example. That's what we call the RIO. There's a few versions of them. For example, here is the what we call the Rio 3224. And the Rio 3224 has 32 inputs by 24 outputs. Out of the 24 outputs, 16 of them are analog, 8 of them, which are the 4 connectors on top are AES EBU. As you know, the 3-pin connector on the AS travels 2 channels, so that's how we get the 24 of them. Each one of those connectors, once again, is an omni input or output. We can route them anywhere we want to. On the back of the unit, you have, once again, the Dante module, primary and secondary. You probably remember that on the back of the console, you have the primary and the secondary for the Dante network as well, and that's how we're communicating. Another version for the remote I/O will be the Rio 1608D. That is 16 inputs by 8 analog outputs. There's 2 more options for the remote I/O, and I will talk a little bit more about those 2 when we get to the QL presentation. Same thing, you have the Dante primary and the secondary on the back of that unit. So when we look at it, we said, okay, so I have the console, I have the CL, and I have the Rio. How do I deal with that configuration? How do they communicate? How exactly do I talk between the 2 of them? It happens through a network cable. That cable needs to be a Cat5e or higher. And the network that we're using to communicate them, it's Dante. Dante, it's an audio network that Yamaha and other manufacturers, for example, like Shure, use to communicate as a network. It's not Yamaha, it's not Shure, it's not anybody else. It's a third-party network that we utilize to communicate product. So normally, Dante works as a star topology. Star topology means that you have something in the middle and you have different signals or different cables going to the different devices. This configuration here is a star topology. What is the middle of that star topology? It's a network switch. That network switch needs to be a 1 gig. Why? Dante works on a 1 gig network. So from there, I have my start, because from there I go to my Rios, from there I go to my console, and that's how I communicate between them. If I only have 1 CL and 1 Rio, I don't need that switch in between. I just run a cable between the 2 of them, and that's it. Now, on the CL, what we did was we took the primary and the secondary, and internally we made a switch, something that is called a daisy chain. And when we choose to have a daisy chain with the product, what we're doing is we're taking a cable, a Cat5e or higher, from that console to the Rio, and then from the Rio to another Rio. How are we connecting that between the primary and the secondary? It doesn't matter. I can take the secondary from the CL going to the primary on the Rio, going from the secondary of the Rio to the primary or the secondary of the other one. It really doesn't matter. Why? Because there is an internal switch taking that signal. It's a daisy chain. Now, that is a single connection. I have 1 cable that is communicating between the devices. What happens if one of those break? I lose my communication from that moment forward. So let's say I have a CL, 1 Rio, another Rio. So Rio 1 and Rio 2. If I lose my cable between the CL and the first Rio, I don't have communication with the 2 Rios. Why? Because there is only 1 cable between the CL and the first Rio. If I have a CL, Rio 1, Rio 2, and the cable between Rio 1 and Rio 2 breaks, I only have communication between the CL and the first Rio, but I don't have communication with the second one. That's why Dante gives you the option of the secondary port. And when we use the secondary port, we're building a redundant network. How do we do that? Then we run 2 cables. We run 1 cable out of the primary and 1 cable out of the secondary. There, we're going to the switch, which is the example that I have here. I'm taking the primary out of the console, going to a switch. I'm taking the secondary out of the console, going to another switch. Primary out of the first Rio, primary out of the second Rio, secondary out of the primary Rio, out of the first Rio, and secondary. 2 cables out of each device going to 2 separate switches. If one of those networks has a problem, the other network takes over. I'm going to go back. Remember on the power supply that there's no glitches, no hiccups, no nothing. It's the same thing here. The network will switch, and that's it. There's no glitches, no pops. The network will switch to the one that is working correctly. Now, if I only have one console and one reel, I don't need the switch in between because I can go primary out of the console to primary on the reel, secondary out of the console to the secondary from the reel. But if I have more than one console and one reel, I will have to add the switch to be able to communicate all those devices. Now, when you're using that daisy chain, you cannot say, wait, but I can create a redundant network if I just go out of the last device on that daisy chain and I bring a cable back to the primary. That doesn't work. So if I go out of here into here and out of here, here on a daisy chain, and I choose to come out of that last device back to the first one, good luck. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be creating a network storm. How do you fix that? Well, you turn everything off and you restart all over again, and just don't do that ring configuration because it just doesn't work with Dante. All right? Now, so you're telling me that I have this network thing and all that stuff is there. How exactly am we going to be doing that? Well, for example, let's look at this example. I can have one CL console, and that CL console could be talking to 8 reels. That's pretty interesting because you told me that I can only take up to 64 channels out of the Dante module. But you're telling me that I can have 8 of those reels plugged in. Remember that I said at the beginning, I can only pick 64, but I can have a lot more than those 64 channels plugged in. That's what happens here. I have all those input channels, and I have one console. And on that console, I can pick up to 64 of them. From where? It's up to you. I can pick 64 channels from the Dante network. Once I have all those reels going to the network, all those input channels are on that network. Every single one of those 32 inputs on each box, it's inside of the Dante network. What I'm doing with the console is I'm saying, out of all those input channels, I'm going to pick up to 64 of them. And I'm going to put them wherever I want. Now, utilizing the CLs with the reels, you can have up to 4 CL consoles that have control of the mic pre. So you say, so that's it, I can only have 4 consoles? No, you can have more than 4 consoles attached to that Dante network, but up to 4 of them have the option of controlling the mic pre. The other consoles don't have that option. So I can have 10 consoles plugged in there, and I just choose 4 of them to control the mic pre. You think about 4 consoles, you know, that's really not that common. It is. Think about it. Front of house, monitors, broadcast, recording, that's 4. Or I could be building a large network where I have a production console. Then I have a music console. Then I have a broadcast console mixing music. Then I have a broadcast console mixing production. Then I have a monitor console for production. Then I have a monitor console for music. Right there, I have 6 consoles. Up to 4 of them can control the mic pre. So once again, the reels will get ID. You will ID them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That will send those channels in a specific order that I will show you in a minute to that Dante network, and we'll pick them however we need to get them. Yes, sir. You can. On the expansion card, you could add the MY Audinet, the MY Dante. But keep in mind, it doesn't matter. I can have a separate Dante network, but at a time, I'm still locked to those 64, actually out of those 72 channels, 64 coming from the Dante network, built in. I can take the other 8 from the Dante cards, but I'm limited to the amount of channels that I can mix based on the fader count that I have in front of me. But yes, I can have a Dante network wired on the Dante module. I can have a separate Dante network via cards as well. That is correct. Yep. So I mentioned already that when you ID things, the console will take that signal and will line it up however is the best way possible. So for example, I go to my Rio number 1 and I say, okay, this Rio is going to be ID 1 and second Rio ID 2 if I'm using a 64 channel. So when I recall that scene 000, and I have this system connected, what the console is going to do is it's going to take the 32 channels from the Rio that has ID number 1, and it's going to patch it to input channels 1 through 32. The Rio that has ID number 2 will be channels 33 to 64. That's what this is showing me here. I have the 64 channels. I have 2 Rios with ID 1 and 2, 1 to 1, 1 through 64. On the CL5, channels 65 to 72, remember, are coming from the 8 omni inputs on the back of the console, and that's the default for those channels 65 through 72. Then, of course, you can see that my mixes and my matrix and my stereo left and right and Q and all that stuff, it's all going to that Dante network. Keep in mind, once you have those channels on that Dante network, you can pick them however you want. I can put them on any input. I can put them on any fader. Once they're on the network, you can pick them from any other place. So you know how we used to do that, that connection between the monitor console and the front of house console? You know what? The front of house console is going to send you a stereo mix to the monitor console. The monitor console is going to send 2 channels to the front of house console, and we're running analog. Well, once I have those consoles on the network, they can also talk to each other. Why? It's not only the Rios talking to the CLs, it's also the CLs talking to the other CLs. So if I have those 4 consoles, 5 consoles, 6 consoles within that network, I can say this console here is going to send 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, 8 channels to that other console. That same console is going to send 2 other channels to another console. Once again, once you have them within that Dante network, you can pick and choose where and how many channels they are going to be sending among themselves. So there is a lot of flexibility that comes with it. The output for Dante, once again, is the same thing. As I mentioned, you have those outputs, all of them going to the Dante network. You have the different Rio boxes. It could be 1 of them, 2 of them, 3 of them, and we can patch them however we want to patch them. We can take any one of those outputs. We can put them into any one of those omni outputs on any one of the Rios. So, for example, I can have a front of house console and a monitor console, and I have 2 Rios 3224. I could be sending from my front of house console left, right, center, sub to one of the Rio, to 4 channels on one of the Rios. The other outputs could be getting signal from the monitor console to hit amplifiers or to go to self-power monitors on stage. It really doesn't matter. We can take any one of those connectors and we can route any signal to any of them from any one of those sources that is within that network. Now, any questions so far? Because I'm leaving Dante behind right now. Dante could get pretty deep if we choose to do that. I'm just giving you a quick idea of what Dante is about. Dante is a very flexible technology. So going back, yes?
Do you access Dante from the board or from the Rio?
Great question. Actually, Andres paid that guy about $5 at lunchtime to ask that specific question at this time. So did he pay you or no? He owes you $5. Very good question. So you want to repeat your question to the group?
Do you access Dante from the
Console?
or from the Rio's module?
Very good. So how do we access Dante? how do we look at Dante? We have multiple options to pick Dante, to look at Dante, to choose how we're going to route Dante. The CL has the capability of routing and picking and choosing how Dante is going to communicate. Now, Audinet, which is the company that develops Dante, has a computer program called Dante Controller. Thank you, Andres. Audinet, which is the company that makes Dante, has Dante Controller. And Dante Controller is a PC or Mac computer program that will let you do all that patching. Now, as I said, you can do it from the console. If it's something very basic, the console, the Rios, you don't need to really utilize Dante Controller. We always recommend people to utilize Dante Controller, and that is for a very specific reason. Dante Controller has a lot of information that it's involved in that program. If you need to monitor something, if you need to troubleshoot something within the network, Dante Controller will provide you with that information. Dante Controller will show you how your network is behaving. Dante Controller will show you if something is not doing the 1 gig that I mentioned that they have to do. All that information will be available in Dante Controller. So a lot of times people call and say, hey, I'm doing this and I am having a problem. Do you know what it is? And we said, okay, are you running Dante Controller? No. Okay. Then it's going to be very difficult for me to troubleshoot. Yeah, we can try to do certain things, but to tell you the truth, if you connect Dante Controller, it will be a lot easier because Dante Controller will provide us a lot of information. So on a basic network, yeah, you can do it from the console. That's not a problem. At the end of the day, we always recommend have a computer attached to the network because the computer program will give you a lot of information if you want to monitor the network and especially if you need to troubleshoot something within it. Any other question? Can't believe I forgot that name. Okay, so going back to the console. Basically, the basic operation of the console is utilizing the hardware. Part of that hardware is utilizing the screen. You have the screen. There is 2 main screens in there. There is an overview screen and there is a selected channel screen. Basically, it's a touch screen. Touch whatever you need. You know what? I'm here. I don't know what this is. Start touching things around, and you will see that pop-up windows are going to start opening. So the touch screen has only 2 main windows. One of them is the overview screen, where you're looking at 8 channels at a time. The other one is the selected channel screen, and basically that's giving you information from one specific channel at a time. On the selected channel screen, you have the specific information of that input or that output channel. So when I select a channel and I'm looking at the selected channel screen, I view exactly everything. What am I sending to the mixes? What is my EQ, my head amp, my assignment to DCA's mute group? It's all available there. So it's very, very visual. That's the way that we navigate the system. Now, the CL, the QL, digital consoles, they have a lot of tools, and a lot of times we don't utilize those tools the best way possible. So I'm just going to run you through a couple of things that are available, because a lot of times you'll be surprised that we don't even think about it, and we just want to stay on that analog console instead of taking advantage of all the tools that a digital console has, that at the end of the day, it's going to be very flexible for you. So, for example, naming channels. How many times on an analog console you have your tape, you have your Sharpie, right? Wait, the day that you brought your tape, you forgot the Sharpie. The day that you have your Sharpie, you forgot the tape. And the day that you brought the Sharpie and the tape, the video guy came and took it from you, right? So now that you have that option of naming something, we can do that. In that name, it's going to be part of your scene. So on my scene number 1, my channel 1 could be the kick. But on my scene number 2, that channel 1, I can save it as my MC. On my scene number 3, could be my pastor. On my scene number 4, it could be my keyboard player. however you save it. That select, adjust, and store. When you push that store, that's the way the console is going to remember it. So if on my scene number 2, I saved it as an MC, when I recall that scene number 2, that channel 1 is going to say MC. If on scene number 1, that fader 1 was the kick, when I recall scene number 1, it's going to say the kick. It's how you save it. So instead of putting tape, removing the tape, putting the other tape on it, just label the channel. Not to mention that, especially when you have layers, for some reason we've been scratching our head trying to figure out a way that we can make the tape change by itself when you change the layer. We haven't get to that point where we can get the console to do that. So it's a lot easier if you just do it digitally, all right? Very simple to do. You have the row at the bottom and you have the row on top. Just touch on it, and when you touch on it, you're going to get to this window here, and this window here, like for example, thank you, man. You had a view of the console there. Look at that. Can you go back? Yeah. So you see, I have the names here. I have the names up here. I can touch on it. I get to this window here. Look, icon, name. My channel number 1 says kick. I can choose an icon. I can just say it's the snare. And then at the bottom, I have sample names. I can say it's the snare. If it's not what I want to call it, I can go to the name, and I can say test. Now, that channel number 1 says test. If I save that to a scene, that's the way it's going to come back. It's that simple. You see, it doesn't take a lot of time. You just got to do it and save it, and it will come back to you. Same thing with the bar, the color bar. You pick and choose the color that you want to assign for that channel. And, of course, you're going to have the name available there on the control surface. You're going to have the color. The color is pretty good because if you're doing multiple things, you could be very specific with colors. You know, I can have all my drums in one color. I can have my vocals in another color. So visually, something that will help you navigate the system pretty quick. The other thing that we can do to take advantage of it is linking or grouping. You know, on these consoles now, you can take channels from everywhere and you can combine them. I can say, you know, I have all these channels here and I have 4, 6 choir mics, and I'm always, you know, putting all my fingers together to be able to move all the faders at once. Well, I can create a channel link. And I can say, okay, when I move one of the faders, all the other ones are going to follow. But not only the fader, I can pick and choose specific parameters. I can say that only the fader is going to be linked. I can say only the EQ. I can say that every single parameter is going to be the same. They could be anywhere around the console. So, you know, if I want to group things or if I want to keep stuff in one layer, well, if I link them, I can put that channel somewhere else. And just by having one in front of me, I can control them. Multiple things that we can do with that channel link. In that channel link, it's also scene dependent. You see, I can have something linked here, but I don't need to have it linked every single place around the console or through every single scene. The other thing is DCA grouping. DCA is a nickname that Yamaha uses for the analog VCA, voltage controlled amplifier. There is no amplifiers in here, it's all DSP. So digital controlled amplifier is just a nickname. Everything there is DSP. So the console has a total of 16 DCAs. DCAs, what it's doing is controlling a fader value. Very different to an audio group. A lot of times people say, okay, so I have all my drums in there and I'm going to put them on a group and then I'm going to take that group to the stereo left and right. Yes, you can do that here too. But if what you're thinking is that you want to have your group just to bring the drums up and down, that's normally done via VCA or a DCA in the digital domain. Why? Because if I take my drums and I assign them to the group, I'm assigning the audio from those channels, those drum channels to my group. And then from that group, I'm going to the stereo. If I bring my group down, those faders, wherever they are there. If I have something post-fader, pre-fader, whatever, that signal is going. But if I take those same drum channels and I assign them to a DCA, when I pull that DCA down internally, what I'm doing is, those drum channels, I'm pulling them down. On a DCA, there's no compressor, no EQ, no dynamics, because there's no audio that travels through a DCA. It's only the control of a channel or multiple channels. And once again, 16 of them, it's all scene dependent as well on the console. The other thing, mute groups. To tell you the truth, mute groups were pretty big back in the analog days. Now on digital consoles, mute groups became very secondary. You know why? Because we use scenes. Normally, the mute groups were to turn some channels on, some channels off. Now we do that with scenes, and not only on and off. Now we have controls of EQs on different scenes and all these things. Now, what we implemented on the CL, it's something that is called the dimmer. And basically what the dimmer is doing is basically you can control how much you're going to dim whatever channels are assigned to a mute group. It could act like a regular mute group that you activate that mute group and everything gets killed. Or I can say, I have these channels assigned to this mute group. When I activate my mute group, I don't want to kill those channels completely. I just want to drop them maybe 3 dBs, maybe 6 dBs. I have to admit this, when I first saw that, I kind of like didn't really understand, okay, so what is the theory behind it? And started looking at it, and the way that some people are using those dimmers, it's actually pretty interesting. I was talking to a monitor guy that what he's doing is he's putting everything on a mute group that has a 3 dB drop. He has all those channels assigned to a mute group that has a 6 dB drop. So what happens? Okay, so I'm mixing monitors. I feel that there is something about to take off. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to push that mute group that is going to drop everything 3 dBs. So before that feedback takes off, I'm controlling it. Hey, if it's going already and I was not quick enough, I'm going to push that mute group that now is going to drop everything 6 dBs so I can cut a feedback pretty quick. It's one of the uses of that dimmer in there. Mute groups are also scene dependent. The other thing is the rack. You have everything built in. Every input channel, every output channel has a 4-band parametric EQ. Every input channel, every output port has a delay. Why an input channel delay? If you're doing corporate stuff, for example, when you're doing satellite transfer or satellite communication, a lot of times what happens is video needs to do a lot of processing, or the signal has to go through a lot of video processing versus audio doesn't need to go through a lot. So that's the old Chinese movie translated to English where you see the guy talking and then you hear. That's exactly what you see on the screen. You see the person talking, or you hear the person talking, and then finally you see the lips moving. Well, if I'm doing something like that, what I can do is I can activate the input channel delay for that specific channel, and now I can delay the audio for that input to match the video signal. And of course, on the output port delay, if I have, for example, delay speakers, I can use that output port delay to delay my speakers. Even front fills, sometimes like to delay the main PA to the kick. If you're mixing music, there's a lot of things that we can do with these delays. But besides having all that, you also have a rack in the CL, and actually you have multiple racks. You have 2 graphic EQ racks. Each one of them has 8 graphic EQs. Then you have another rack that has 8 effects. Those 8 effects are based on the SPX line, the XPX 2000. And you have a premium rack. And under the premium rack is where you're going to find those Rupert Neve devices. It's all included. When you first open your premium rack, there is nothing that shows up there. So sometimes people think, oh, wow, so I need to go and buy something else? No, you don't. It's all available. It's just that we don't know what you want to use. That's why that rack, it's completely empty. What you do is you go here to what it says PR mount, you touch on it, it's going to open a pop-up window where you're going to see all the devices that are available there. And once you're there, you choose whatever you want to use, you mount it, and that's it. So once again, it's empty because we don't know what you want to use. The other thing that a lot of times people don't realize is the flexibility. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah. Good question. The question is if we have updated the CL to have the Dugan Auto Mixer, which is included on the QL, and I'm going to talk about that when I go to the QL presentation. As of right now, no, but we announced a firmware update for the CL coming in the future that will have the Dugan interface on that version. So it is coming. I don't have an exact date or anything, but it is coming, and it was announced. Very good. The other thing on the bus setup, it's the way that you can use the mix outputs. You have here 24 mixes. Mixes could be auxes or they could be groups. You're not fixed to a specific amount of auxes. You're not fixed on a specific amount of groups. Here, I have 24 mixes. I can choose if I want the 24 to be auxes. I can choose if I want the 24 to be groups. I can say I want 12 auxes and I want 12 groups. I can say I want 20 auxes and 4 groups. You can pick and choose. You have the flexibility of choosing how they are going to be interacting. Not only that, that configuration is also going to be scene dependent. So I can build a scene where I have 24 auxes. I can have another scene where I have 12 groups, 12 auxes. It's all done through the firmware on the console. So you see I go to the setup, I go to the bus setup, and I get to this window here. Here, I also have the option of choosing if those mixes are going to be mono or if they are going to be stereo. The fixed option, that's the group. Yamaha calls an audio group a fixed mix. And a variable mix, it's an aux. It's the same thing, we just, once again, using a different name for it. Variable equals aux, fixed equals a group. If I'm using a variable mix, which is an aux, and the signal is pre-fader, I have two options. I can say, okay, variable pre-EQ, and variable pre-EQ means that the signal is gonna go to that aux before it goes through the EQ, before it goes through the dynamics. Or the default, it's here, variable pre-fader. And variable pre-fader, it's a signal that will go to that aux after the EQ, after the dynamics. If something is post-fader, you know it's after absolutely everything. So the only option to change here is for the pre. If you choose fix, which is a group, you know that that's also going to be post-fader as well. This configuration, groups, auxes, once again, it's all scene dependent. And one more thing, here at the bottom, you see mix 1 through 16, mixes 17 through 24 plus matrix. You also have the same options for your 8 matrix outputs. So I can pick and choose how the signal is gonna go to those matrix as well. So a lot of flexibility there. The other thing is the recording. Let's face it, everybody likes to record nowadays. Everybody wants to record. Remember in the old days, we used to record to a cassette, then we went to a DAT. Some people probably remember the mini disc. Nowadays, let's face it, everything is an MP3, right? So what is sound quality right now? If you can make something sound like an MP3 going through a $10 set of headphones, you're in business. That is sound quality right now. Let's face it. That's what people are getting used to. On the CL as well as the QL, I mentioned already about the USB port. And the USB port will allow you to do a 2-track recording. 2-track of what? It's up to you. It could be your left and right output. It could be an aux. It could be a direct output of a specific channel. You pick and choose what is going to go there. By default, the stereo left and right, it's assigned to go to that USB, but we can change it. So in that recording, it's going to be an MP3 format. Now, the other option that you have with that USB is to do playback. It's either or. I can either record or I can playback. If you want to do playback, what you do is on your USB key, you create a folder that is YPE. That's the name of the folder that you need to create. That is a root directory. Within the YPE, you're going to create a folder called songs, and you're going to put your files, your music files, right there, that song. There, once you have them there, they could be an MP3, AAC file, for example. Those are the formats that the console will play. Now, what happens is you have them there, you have them on that directory in there. I can go and I can pick and choose what file I'm using and where I'm going to have control. By default, the USB playback is nowhere on the console. But I can go on the console and say, my left and right is going to be on channels 2 and 3, or you know what, channels 15 and 60, however you want to do it, because it's up to you. Yes? Do I? Oh, low battery? My computer was connected. What happened? How about there? Okay. It's something called an on and off switch. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. So basically, normally when something is on the on position, something happens, and if it's on the off position, kind of like nothing happens. I have a good friend in Boston that is pretty good with the on and off switch, so that's why I'm saying that joke. So you have that option. Now, the other thing that you can do, anybody here does corporate stuff where you have play-ons that you need to do? Yeah, so a lot of times we have a CD player or we have an instant replay, whatever it is, and we're waiting for that cue to get there. One of the things that I can do is I can put those play-ons, I can put them on a USB, on a file, and by utilizing a user-defined key, I can put in a specific file on a user-defined key. So guess what? You know where I have control now of my play-on? Right here on the console. The CEO is coming. They want me to play this song. I don't need to turn around. Maybe the CD player is asleep. Maybe I don't know what's going on. No, I can have it on that USB. I have it assigned to a user-defined key, and I know that when I press that user-defined key, that specific file is going to play. Or with a user-defined key, I can choose to play the next file or the previous file or stop or play. Multiple options in there. Yes? That is correct. The question is if the directory comes up on the screen. That is correct. When you put that USB on the screen shows up. You see the different folders that you have. And because the other thing is, you can have different folders in there as well. So you're going to see the different folders. You can have different songs. However you want to do it, but the screen will show up on the screen, so it's very easy to navigate. You just touch, you just pick what you need, and you recall that stuff, and that's what is going to come up. That is correct. The other thing that you have available is multi-track recording. You know, multi-track recording is becoming more and more flexible. And for example, here, CL comes with Nuendo Live. If you're not aware, Yamaha owns Steinberg. Steinberg has Nuendo. There's a software called Nuendo Live, which is basically a software to record. There's no editing capabilities or anything. It's just a software that you can record. Nuendo Live comes with the CL. If I have, for example, my channel's name and I have color bars and everything, and I connect my Nuendo Live to the console, once that is done, those colors, those names will show up on my Nuendo Live. There is an extension that needs to be installed on your computer for that to happen, but it is available. And within the console itself, I have a Nuendo Live window here where I have the transport commands available from the screen. I can also drop a marker on a specific point. I can have a marker that gets set on that Nuendo when I recall a scene. There's a lot of flexibility. You know, I don't know if anybody here coming from a church by any chance? Yes, some of you? No? Churches love multi-track recording. Churches can really utilize this. You know why? Because a lot of times, most of the people working at the churches, these people are volunteers. They really don't know how sound works. And you want them to learn how to mix. And now for them to learn how to mix or for them to learn how to EQ a kick, they need a poor drummer or somebody around the church to sit there and kick and hit that kick for 2 hours for them to see what the EQ is doing. No, you know what? You record your Sunday service and you can bring that volunteer and that volunteer can play that recording back, and now you can use that to teach them the different things that they can do, how EQ works, or how they can mix. Churches also are utilizing this, Christmas program. They are recording the Christmas program. They are recording it on DVD. Then they are going to mix it. And then, they can sell the Christmas program as well. So it is very flexible. When you look at the connection where you're using a daisy chain, you have your computer with that Nuendo Live. You're definitely going to be using that Dante controller. There is a software called DVS, Dante Virtual Sound Card, that what it does is takes the network port on your computer and makes it an audio sound card. So basically, utilizing a Cat5e or higher connected via Dante, I can send 64 channels of audio from that CL Rio system to my computer, and with that same cable, I can send those 64 channels back to the system for playback. So if I'm doing a daisy chain, computer, console, Rio to another Rio. If I'm doing a redundant network, I just take my computer and I plug it into that primary switch, and that's it. It's very simple to do. Believe me, very, very simple to do. Any question? All right.
Jose, I got something.
Go ahead. Sorry. You're here.
One thought that you guys have probably come across, but a nice thing about being able to record and playback is for you guys that go into churches and do installations and things like that, as you know, as Jose has said, a lot of their guys are not pros, they're not sound guys. So if you can get them to just hit record on one of their services, you can come in, dial everything in, set the presets, save it, and that way, every time that band comes in, they just hit the preset. And that's a huge sale for those of you guys who are doing installations in churches.
Yep.
I do it all the time.
Yep.
Is one of the big sales on a digital board is that you can dial it in for them, and then they just come in every day and they just have a guy hit the preset, and then they can tweak it from there. But they have a pretty good reference point. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, this recording, even the 2-track, I have people that at the end of the night, they need to give a 2-track to the client, and used to be done with a CD player. Let's face it, my computer doesn't have a CD-ROM anymore. So everything is happening through an MP3. I was doing a festival not too long ago that basically at the end of every set, we gave the band a USB. Here's your set. Done. You have a client that at the end of the night wants to hear what happened during the show. You can record a 2-track, and at the end of the night, it's like, here, this is what happened tonight. It's that simple. So if you're not utilizing that, I would say start looking at it, because definitely the flexibility that you have and what you get out of it, it's a lot. Something else, CL Editor. All these consoles, they have a computer program to control it. On the CL, it's called CL Editor, and QL is going to be called QL Editor. It could be done hardwired to the console, or it could be wireless with that wireless router connected to the network port on the back of the console. The editor will work as an offline or online. Online will be utilizing the computer to make changes to the console. So for example, I could be mixing something on the control surface on the console, doing something. I can have Andres just naming channels for me. You know what? We need to do this really quick. Here's my input list. Can you please go and name all my channels where I'll try to do this sound check. I could do that wirelessly. I can also have the same program offline. I could be sitting on a plane going to a gig, and I could be building what that show is going to be about. When I get to site, I can transfer that data via USB or via that Cat 5e or higher cable. So these are tools that are available. There's also the stage mix for the iPad, which is another huge tool, because now I can have an iPad, I can have a computer, and I can have the console itself. So I could be on the console while Andres is naming channel, while Omar is with the stage mix on the stage trying to build monitor mixes. That is priceless. You know why? Because how many times you have to mix front of house and monitors from the same console, and the stage is 100 feet away, and you're up and down. The musician is looking at you. You're looking at them. They're going like, and you don't know what they are saying to you. There is a lot of frustration that happens. It does. So if I can grab my iPad and I can go next to that musician and say, what do you need? Oh, I need this. Okay, yeah, let me do some changes here. Okay, you know what? Oh, while I'm there, let me just change my EQ a little bit. You're connecting with that musician, and I guarantee you that level of frustration will drop, because now it's not that the guy doesn't know what I'm talking about and he cannot come here or anything. No, next to him, right here, I'm talking to you. Look, I'm paying all my attention to you right now. What do you want? What do you need? We can make the changes right here. This technology, I'm telling you, when you start utilizing the tools with this system, you will see the big difference. And these are all tools. Tools that you choose if you want to use them or not. Tools that at the end of the day are going to make a big difference for what you're trying to do. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the QL, and as I said, it's not going to be as long because a lot of things are very similar. I think we have until 6, right? So do you guys want to take a quick stretch? And I guarantee you, a wake up, or, I'm sorry, yeah, stretch around a little bit. How about if we take like about 5 minutes? We'll come back, we'll go through this, and we can all say goodbye.
Thanks, Jose. Guys, a couple quick announcements that's worth your ears. We are providing a special for those of you who physically attended, and here they are. All orders placed by day's end tomorrow, you'll get, for all K-series, K8, 10, and 12 that is, you get a free tote bag. For all other QSC orders, 5% off unless it's over $5,000, then 10%. This is in addition to your dealer pricing, so that's on top of that. Touch mix is not included, okay? Also, yeah, everyone's like, son of a gun, but it is what it is. And also 5% on all Shure and Yamaha. That's until day's end tomorrow. That's only for those of you who attended, but that's on top of your dealer pricing, so take advantage of it. Cool?